Setbacks are temporary, but comebacks, they are legendary. Welcome back to the PSI Effect, where we pause, shift, and ignite purpose that speaks louder than your past. This is Nuge, and together with Frankie, we're your hosts in this space, and your comeback starts now. What if the thing that finally fixes your exhaustion isn't a vacation? It's something that genuinely terrifies you? Stay with us, because by the end of this episode, you're going to know whether you've been treating the wrong disease. And if you have, rest has been making you worse. But before we get into it, we're here with Frankie, or I'm here with Frankie, and you're here with Frankie too, I guess. We're here with Frankie.
That's right. We're all here.
And so, with that, Frankie usually gives us a little intro, what's going on. So, Frankie, how about it? What's going on?
Hey, I'm living the dream. This summertime weather has made itself quite apparent down here in North Carolina. Man, I walked across my yard the other day and it was crunchy. Like, my grass is dead. It is so hot. I mean, if I needed to dig a hole, I could not do it manually at this point because the ground is just so dry around here. But I still can't complain, though. This past week was really refreshing for me. We had a staff retreat for my job, so we went off site for a few days to kind of refresh ourselves. And it was very much in the vein of a pause, shift, and ignite type of experience where we sat down and reflected on what had happened. And, we kind of ideated on what we could do differently and sort of planned our launch for the next segment of time. So in the back of the room, I was smiling to myself because it sounded eerily familiar, like we were about to pause, shift, and ignite as an organization. So I was really, really excited about that.
Awesome. Yeah, I can imagine how that would have sat with you, especially if you're sitting in the back just kind of observing. Cool. Well, as promised, we're going to talk a little bit about exhaustion today. And I know we've talked a little bit about rest and health and those habits in the past. But, for the audience today, just, want you to start off by considering what if you're not exhausted from doing too much, but what if it's just from doing too little of something that actually matters to you?
I mean, that's an interesting concept. Prior to us preparing for this topic, I'd never really thought about it in this way. And it's very interesting because we automatically assume that I'm worn out, I'm tired, I'm doing too much. But then to try to look at it from another perspective, to be like, well, maybe I'm feeling this way because I'm just not engaged enough. And my body is just like blah. And, the blahs are quite detrimental if you're ever trying to bounce back or come back, because you just feel like I'm not engaged. It's not meaningful. It reminded me of a statement that continuous improvement expert made in one of the conferences I went to. They said it's possible to be overworked and underutilized at the same time, where you could be in your role working hard, but it's not really engaging all of you, right? And it's not necessarily that you're pushing beyond your limits with your work, but you're just not engaging all of yourself. And that can just be worrisome. It can kind of grate at you a little bit and wear on you over time if you're not able to flex some muscles that you could bring to the table.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because when you think about that, you have a lot of reasons that you say to yourself, why you're not engaged, in something that's going on. And we're going to get into that because, today's topic really is about burnout versus boredom, right? And the two are similar in their attributes, right? So like burnout is the result of overstimulation. So that's where you're just, you feel like you're doing too much, you have a lot on your plate, and that you're just, constantly stressed out. Right. And I know that we've all been there, or we've all felt like we've been there in that burnout situation. And then, boreout or boredom is the result of understimulation, where you have a lack of a challenge and a deficit of meaning. So like you're not being fulfilled in the things that are happening in your life at the time. And so you just kind of have this feeling like, do you actually matter, or what you're doing, does it actually matter?
Yeah, I like the terminology you used there. The burnout versus you snuck it in there, bore out. I like that. I like that notion that to kind of contrast the two. And you used another word in there that kind of stood out to me, and I want to kind of zero in on that. You talked about the word fulfillment or lack
Mm,
thereof.
yeah.
What does fulfillment look like? Because we could be stacking up victories left and right, but not be fulfilled. What's the distinction in your book?
Well, clearly that's going to be different for different people. But, for me, I feel fulfilled when I have a sense of purpose, when I feel like I'm actually, as I mentioned, doing something that actually matters, something that's meaningful. And, it could be meaningful for me, or it could be meaningful for those that I'm around, or those that I'm servicing, or that I'm serving. That's fulfillment for me. And as in everyday life perspective, just having time at home with family and those kinds of things. I mean, I feel fulfilled with my family. Um, because I happen to like my family, and I apologize to some of you out there who don't really care much for some folks in your family, but um, that gives me fulfillment.
I got you. So it's kind of in the eye of the beholder, but there's something more to fulfillment than just checking the box. Like, yes, I did it. I did the thing. I did it correctly, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm fulfilled by doing it. There has to be some meaning and some purpose behind it. I can get behind that definition. And I think that's kind of
Yeah,
critical.
go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, I think that's kind of critical as, all of us, the two of us and our audience included, as we're in that pause and we're trying to reflect on what's going on, we need to really understand what does fulfillment look like for each one of us as we're trying to navigate this thing.
You and I were going down the same road, because I was going to talk about that whole pause and introspection, and understanding what fulfillment really means for you. And I think that sometimes we get busy, or often we're busy, and we don't really stop to think about, what is that fulfillment that we are, what is that threshold of fulfillment for us?
Yeah, and as cool as it sounds to say burnout versus bore out, it seems like those two things are somewhat oxymoronic, like they're competing against one another. So how is it that we could mistake one for the other? We talked about misdiagnosing what we need to treat. How can we mistake one for the other? Boredom versus burnout.
Because they have the same characteristics, right? Because burnout seems to make you exhausted, right? You're just tired from everything that you're doing. You're used to just going flat out, doing everything that comes up, right? And so that burnout, the stress comes along, and you're just exhausted. And in bore out, you're not really fulfilled. You don't have that thing that really matters to you. And it gives you that feeling of you don't, you don't, you have a feeling that nothing really matters. And so I think you just kind of gravitate to things like, lounging around, right? Maybe
Mhm.
doom scrolling, or watching TV, or whatever. And you just have that feeling, that physical feeling that you're just tired, but you're just not really, you don't have the right things at that moment to engage you, to give you a lift.
Feel that. And I actually have been in that space before. Like, all right, well, yeah, the wife is out of town at a conference, the kids are staying with the grandparents, I'm just at the house by myself. You know what? I'm going to have a nice relaxing day. I'm going to sit around, and then, I get into this vegetative state, and I just feel,
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
that blah becomes a spiral. I'm not engaging. I'm resting. And, we talk a lot here on this podcast about how valuable it is for us to take a break and to rest. But there are times when resting isn't the solution to our problem. And if burnout and bore out kind of feel the same when they manifest, I can see how I might get confused as to what I need to do to solve the problem.
Yeah, because I think that blah feeling that you mentioned, it can just like, it can just keep you going, right? It can just keep you going in that feeling. And one TV show becomes two, and two TV shows become three, and before you know it, right, you're just there. And not having something meaningful to get you off that couch. I mean, because there's plenty that you could do. You could get up, you could clean the house, you could mow the lawn, right? But I'm talking about things that are, just very personal to you, that just really matter in your life. And so, The aha moment here is, sometimes the cure for exhaustion isn't more sleep. As you mentioned, it's finding something worth waking up for.
Say that again.
Sometimes the cure for exhaustion isn't more sleep, it's finding something worth waking up for.
Something that gets the blood pumping, something that gets the mind engaged.
Yeah, something that gets you going. And I think you hear a lot of gurus and business professionals and so forth, entrepreneurs. One of the questions that they'll always ask is, "What is your why?"
Mm.
And I think this kind of plays into that. Finding something worth waking up for is somewhat a why.
Gotcha. And when we find that thing, it seems like, the way we've been talking about it, it seems like there's a balancing act that still has to be found. Like when we find that thing that gets us moving again, it gets us going, we have to balance the amount of stimulation because we talked about burnout being overstimulated. And then we kind of talked about the bore out or the boredom being understimulation. So it sounds like there's this happy medium that we've got to find in terms of our stimulus or stimuli in our environment to make sure that we don't veer too far to either end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I think that part is partly the balance in and of itself. When you have that meaningful um, thing in your life that matters to you, when you're doing something that really matters, I think it kind of takes away from the overstimulation, right? Because that's just you're just moving, right? You're almost doing things automatically. But when you have something that is meaningful, I think it takes away from that because now your energies are kind of shifted to this thing over here, and maybe you're not, maybe this isn't a full time thing, but I think your energies are kind of shifted and you are more energized to do what matters, and you still have energy left for everything else.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, and I've experienced that too, just recently, um, you know, adding a new hobby, that a challenging hobby. And I thought there's like, all right, well, I just got this 3D printer, or actually, my wife and kids got it as a gift for me. I got to figure this thing out. It looks like it's going to be complicated, but I've actually been energized by this new challenge of trying to figure this thing out. So yeah, I definitely am on board with what you're putting down there.
How do you think this fits into our pause framework? We're talking about burnout and we're talking about bore out, but how does that fit into the pause framework that we have, Frankie?
So we always talk about the pause being one of the most valuable steps because everything kind of springboards from there. In the pause, we have to really take inventory of what's going on around us. And in this situation where we've got burnout versus bore out, we have to make sure we discern between the two. Because like we mentioned at the top of the conversation, if we misdiagnose what's going on, we're going to try to apply the wrong treatment. So in the pause, we've got to sit down and we've got to really ask ourselves some questions. And these questions might be uncomfortable and they might be tough, but we've got to ask ourselves some real questions to determine, are we suffering from burnout or are we suffering from the bore out? And I think we've got three questions that our audience can use to kind of get the conversation, the internal dialogue started. The first question, do you feel overwhelmed by the volume of your tasks or are you overwhelmed by the pointlessness of your tasks?
Yeah, that hits. Um, I mean, I can think of, when I was in the workforce, being overwhelmed by tasks because there's sometimes where things were just coming, they just come, right? Um, always a different project or something coming, and you just trying to work through it, trying to meet the deadlines, and you just going. And on the flip side of that, like you said, the uh some of the tasks you felt or you feel like they're pointless. Maybe they mean something to someone up the ladder or, in the organization somewhere, but in your day, it seems rather pointless. And so I think that pause and that reflection is really important to work through that.
Yeah. And that, the way that you kind of phrase that ties back to that quote that I shared from the continuous improvement person. You can be overworked and underutilized. And I think that's what you just described perfectly there in your response. So that's the first question. Do you feel overwhelmed by the volume of your task? Are you overwhelmed by the pointlessness of your task? So question number 2, when you take a weekend off, do you come back feeling restored, or do you come back feeling a deep sense of dread days?
The Mondays, exactly.
The Mondays.
The
Woo!
Mondays.
The most
And
dreaded day of the
then
week.
and then you beat yourself up too sometimes, because if it's a really good weekend and you don't get home till late Sunday night, and
Woo!
then you're up early Monday morning,
Yes, sir. Been there, done that. Guilty.
plays in.
Yeah. But that makes sense though, that we want to really evaluate that question, because if we're doing something that's bringing us a sense of fulfillment, it's like you said, it's going to be something that is worth getting up for. It's going to be worth getting out the door and diving back into after we've recharged our batteries. Whereas if it's a pointless task or something we're not feeling that great about, yeah, I'm going to slap that snooze button as many times as I can.
Yeah, the guy who invented the snooze button, he
Evil genius.
dude laughed all the way to the bank. All right, you said it was 3 questions. We got one more, right?
Yeah, the third question. All right. So if somebody offered you a brand new, exciting project right now, would your gut, reaction be absolutely not? I can't handle one more thing. Or would your gut say, yes, please give me something to care about?
That makes me think of what we were talking about in a previous episode, and I think you actually brought it up, was the shining things syndrome,
Yeah, the shiny new
right?
thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I think that if someone offered a new project and you were kind of bored in what you were doing, that might be the option that you take.
For sure. So yeah, if we answer that we want to take the project, then that might indicate that we're suffering from the boreout, the boredom side of things. But if we're feeling like we can't balance one more thing, that tells us that we're kind of on that burnout side.
Yeah.
But, these are just 3 questions to get the conversation started. They're not the only questions you should be evaluating during the pause, but they're a good way to sort of get your mind moving in that direction to really discern what it is that ails you.
And that's a good point. I wonder from our audience's perspective, when you do sit down for your pause, no matter what is causing you to pause, do you have questions that you really, think on? Do you write down the questions that come to mind that you want, to answer for yourself? And I think that that's a good practice sometimes in that pause phase. So
Yeah.
that was good. I like the way you put that. So why is this topic so misunderstood? So why is, the stress of burnout and the uncertainty or the unfulfillment of bore out, why is it excuse me, why is it so misunderstood? And it's said that high achievers are conditioned to believe that exhaustion only comes from hard work. And I think, Frankie, you can tell us that's a little bit different, because you go on these mud runs and things, and I'm sure that you're pretty exhausted when you get done.
Facts. 100%, sir.
But as I mentioned, the physical symptoms of burnout and bore out are similar, right? Because
Mhm.
with bore out, you can have insomnia, right? Difficulty sleeping. You can have headaches and brain fog, and that's real similar to burnout,
Mhm.
right? And you just think that you just need to take a step back sometimes. But when you look at the two, when you look at the symptoms, they are really, really very close, right? Um, so I just mentioned, something for you that leads you to exhaustion outside of, what we're talking about maybe in the workplace. But take us through that, and do you have any comparisons for burnout and bore out, even as it relates to your workout regimen?
I'll keep it in the workplace for this one, because, you mentioned the notion of high achievers. And from our earliest adventures in grade school, we're trying to be groomed. Our educators are trying to groom us into high achievers. So what do
Mhm.
we see? We get task lists. We get lists of things that need to be done. And when we can check that thing off the list or mark it as complete or whatever, there's a dopamine rush that we get to say, oh, yes, we got this thing done. You look at these productivity apps that people use,
Mm.
even in the Microsoft suite, if you got a task list or something to manage, what does it have? It has check boxes. It has strike through. So you get some visual indicator. Some of them even have little animations and sound when something gets done, incentivizing us to keep going and to get that thrill of marking something as done on the list, whether it's fulfilling or not. So, we can kind of paint ourselves into a corner if we're chasing that high achiever rush because we think like, okay, well, I don't feel like been working that hard. I shouldn't feel this tired and exhausted. Let me work harder to see if I can overcome this. Or maybe I've been working too hard. Let me just take a break. But no, we're doing mundane tasks that aren't engaging us. And we're stuck in that boredom phase. We're stuck in that boredom realm. And we're racking up wins. Like we said before, we're racking up wins by getting things done, but we're not being fulfilled by what we do. And our body's just like, yeah, blah, blah. I'm just going to feel kind of yucky, kind of foggy. I'm not going to get excited about this. And we find ourselves in the trap.
How do we get out of that?
Well, we've got to kind of reframe it. We got to start the shift where we start making some changes in how we approach the problem, right? So if we've gone through the pause and we've engaged in that internal conversation with ourselves around those three questions and more, those three questions that we just went through, we've got to start trying to bring something new to the table. Like, all right, what can we do differently that's going to, strike the match, that's going to shine a new light in a different direction? And, what's going to give us some additional stimulation, positive stimulation?
Yes,
I do positive stimulation.
absolutely. Yeah, because, muscle memory is real. And
Mhm.
even that can be positive or negative, right? You just kind of do things for, I don't want to say for the sake of doing them, but they're just so habitual for you that it's just automatic. And, I guess you just have to identify if that's how you're operating at that moment, because surely that type of operation leads to more burnout um, than anything else. And, so if you can do your job without thinking about it or, with your eyes closed, are you at risk of burnout? Are you at risk of bore out? I would say probably more bore out than burnout, depending on the workload.
Right.
But, you just have to identify that in yourself. And I think that that truly is an indicator that you need something else to stimulate you, whether it's at the job or whether it's at home.
Yeah, and I want to drive home the fact too. We talked about this in the rat race episode, how things can feel on the job if you feel like you're stuck in the rat race. And this is not our pitch to tell everybody, all right, yeah, if you're not fulfilled by your job, if you're suffering from bore out from your job, leave it right away. We're not saying that that's the solution every time. Everybody's got responsibilities. I know I've got bills to pay. So me just up and leaving a job is not going to be something that I want to, or something that I should just do as the first option. We need to explore other avenues and find ways that we can get that additional stimulation.
And actually, you can sometimes find that on your existing job, in your
Mhm.
existing role, or, just speak to people who are in a position to help you, right? Find something that might be a little bit more fulfilling for you in that position. So I like how you put that because I don't want people to think that, oh, they got to go and drop the job they have today and go and try and find something tomorrow.
Yeah, but I mean, you hit on the main point of all this, though. If we're going to add this stimulus back, increase our stimulation to try to wake things back up, it requires intentionality. You mentioned seek out other folks on the job or, other groups outside of work or explore new things on your own. That requires intentionality. It's not something where we can just sit on our lazy river, inflatable raft and just float and think we're going to find it.
Yeah, and I think that stimulus I think it has to stretch you some because if you're not stretched with this new project or whatever it is that you're doing, then I think you could very easily fall into the same trap that you've been in, right? You can
Mhm.
still fall back into that, bore out and not be fulfilled. So I think that whatever it is that you take on, this outside stimulation from everything that you have been doing has to be something that stretches you, even, maybe scares you a little bit, just makes you uncomfortable to where you have
Mm.
to, have some risk in the situation about, how you're being fulfilled.
Yeah, I think that ties it back into everything we've always talked about here on the podcast. One of the running themes that's just been a through line for all of our conversations has been the notion of discomfort and being a little uncomfortable around what we're doing, uncomfortable with, a situation, whatever the case may be, but that discomfort is a requirement for growth.
And like you said, Frankie, this conversation and this thing that we're presenting here is not to have folks just go and try to, overhaul their entire life, right? The outside stimulus or the challenge to oneself that we're talking about can only be, maybe it's only 10% of your week. Dedicate 10% of your week to doing something that's challenging to you, that makes you uncomfortable, so that you can get out of that, bore out stage. And, just that small amount of time each week to dedicate to something can help you break out of that cycle of understimulation. And I mean, think about when, we started to work on this podcast, that was something outside of my normal
Yes.
that, that I started working on. And I know it was for you as well, but that did stretch me because there were things that, I had to learn. And, there were things that we had to like organize and put together. And, we had to, some stuff we figured out along the way. But, I think that that's a good, um, indicator of something that you can do that doesn't take up your whole week. So, about 10% of your week toward trying to stimulate yourself in a positive way. And, then the rest of your 90% is what you've been doing all along.
Yeah, slow and steady wins the race. We don't have to, like we said before, we don't have to eat the whole cow in one sitting. Break it into smaller pieces, do a little bit at a time, see how things work, make adjustments, and just keep moving forward.
Yeah, that's what it's all about is moving forward. I mean, nobody said that you had to finish the race first. You just have to, keep moving so that you finish what it is that you start, right?
Yeah. Unless you're one of those super competitive folks, there was a movie called the Talladega Nights. And it's a comedy about this,
Oh yeah.
this comedy about a guy who's a race car driver. He's like, I got to be first. If you're not first, you're last. Second place is first loser. And that's not true. That's not how it works. And the things that matter in our lives, it's like, it's not as black and white to say, I'm going to win life. Life is not a finite game that you win. It's an accumulation. It's a kind of an infinite game. You play it the whole time that you're able to. So it's not necessarily an idea of being first or second. It's about moving at a pace that's keeping you going forward, and it's a pace that's sustainable, getting you towards your objectives.
I like that movie, Ricky Bobby.
Ricky Bobby.
Yeah. All right. So as we close out here, I just want the audience to know, Frankie, that you don't have to blow up your life. You need 10% of your week pointed at something that genuinely, excites you, something that wakes you up. Maybe it scares you a little bit. It's just uncomfortable, as we talked about, right? And that's it. And then, that 10%, that one thing can sometimes spill over, right? um, and put you back on track or help energize you for the rest of the 90% that you have. So, I think the bore out goes away when you find that stimulus that you need to actually get you engaged, or get you re-engaged in life. So, go ahead and knock that bore out. Go ahead and kill it. Find that stimulus.
Hmm.
Find something that is meaningful for you. Um, what say you, Frankie? Any closing words for the group?
I mean, it's a slippery slope just because we talked about how similar both of those things can make us feel, bore out versus burnout. So it's important that we really lean in to what we talked about. 3 questions, 3 steps. Remember our 3 questions. Are you overwhelmed by the volume of the task, or are you overwhelmed by the pointlessness? That's question 1. Question 2, when you have a weekend off, are you coming back energized, or are you coming back filled with dread? And then question number 3, if somebody offers you a new project, or is your gut going to tell you, I can't take anything else, I can't take one more thing on my plate, or is it going to tell you, yes, give me something that matters? Evaluating those 3 questions in our pause will help us identify whether it's boredom, boreout, or burnout, and we'll know what to do from there. And if we do see that it's boreout, we've got 3 steps, 3 questions, 3 steps that we can take to try to battle it. And Nuge, you've talked about it, to, audit what the things that we have in our life that are on autopilot. Where are we just going through the motions? Number 2, engineer some friction. Add something challenging in the space. See if we can find that thing worth waking up for that's going to challenge us a little bit. And then 3, like you mentioned, use the 10% rule. Don't blow up everything. Do something small to get started and make adjustments as you go. But yeah, this is a slippery slope, and I hope that our audience has been able to get some insight out of this to help them navigate it, because I struggle differentiating between these things. And I hope that our conversation will help somebody else figure this thing out too.
Awesome. Absolutely. Well, listen, everybody, I really appreciate you being here. I want to encourage you to continue to drop your comments. We've been getting some comments that we've been responding to. So I'm inviting you to go ahead and drop some comments, and, whether it's YouTube or Spotify, wherever you watch the podcast, or even in the social spaces. And also, I want to mention that, just the comments, the likes, the subscriptions, or subscribing to the channel, that really does help us out. We're trying to grow this channel for you and for anyone else that wants to listen. So by all means, feel free to drop us a comment. Let us know how we're doing. Give us some thoughts on your burnout and your bore out, and we will certainly answer those questions in the comments. And so before we go, always, Frankie tells us exactly where you can find us in all the social spaces. And so I will turn it over to you, sir.
Why, thank you, sir. So for all things PSI Effect podcast related, go to our website. This is psipod.com. There you'll find all of our episodes and a link to all the different platforms where you can get the audio version of the podcast. All the spots: Amazon, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean. They're all listed there. We're available on most of the podcast platforms. So find the one that works for you and go ahead and subscribe. You can also see the full video version of our episodes, as well as video shorts on YouTube. You can search the PSI Effect podcast, or use our handle at This Is PSI Pod to find us on YouTube. You can also use that handle to find us on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook at This Is PSI Pod. We love to engage with you. We're truly thankful for the folks that have been reaching out and interacting with us on social media, and we'd love to hear from more of you.
Awesome. All right, everybody. So as always, just remember that setbacks are temporary and comebacks are legendary. And, until next time, be brave and rise on purpose.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the PSI Effect podcast. This show doesn't happen without you, and you can connect with us via Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit our website at thisispsipod.com and find us on YouTube and social media at This Is PSI Pod. That's at This Is PSI Pod. Until next time, remember, be brave and rise on purpose.